Howdy, folks. Hope you brought your ticket, 'cause once this train leaves the station, we ain't slowing down for nobody. We're heading straight into the wild, wild west, back to the days when steam ruled the land, and the only thing louder than the engines was the legend they left behind. This is Beyond the Rails, where history meets mystery, and a few ghost stories like to hop on board too. Special thanks to Tyler's Trains for letting me use some of his amazing photos in this episode. If you liked what you see, go check out his channel and show him some love too. Alright then, grab your seat, don't lean out the window, because the last woman who did got snatched clean off by a giant rattlesnake and ain't been seen since. The last we heard, she was screaming out the window, being snatched off by a rattlesnake to go feed its family. In the early 1900s, Alamosa, Colorado was more than just a dusty depot on the high plains. It was the starting point of the San Juan Mountains, America's only narrow-gauge passenger train. Operated by the Denver Rio Grande and Western Railroad, the San Juan ran daily between Alamosa and Durango, climbing over the San Juan Mountains, threading through Chamba, and pushing on towards Silverton. Hey folks, this just wasn't just a ride, it was a lifetime. Farmers shipped produce, miners rode down from the camps and towns along the routes, depending upon its steady whistle echoing through the valleys. In its heyday, the San Juan carried passengers across some time of most breathtaking scenery of the Rockies, connecting isolated communities to the outside world. But just like any great railroad, the San Juan collected more than just passengers, it collected stories. One tale story talks about a clown bound for a tiny town of Tibolo, population of 5. The timetable showed a stop, but San Juan, however, had other ideas. The train roared past the blistering 25 miles per hour, leaving the clown's wife and 3 children waving goodbye, as it were a grand circus finale. Some say the train held him hostage, others claim that the real culprit was a can-can dancer in Durango who swept him away before the timetable could ever have a chance. Whatever the truth it was proof that life on the narrow gauge was never short on surprises. By 1951, the San Juan made its final run, a victim of highways and automobiles. Yet the legendary life lives on with Durango and Chamba, where steam still curls into the mountain skies, reminding us of the days when narrow-gauge rails carried big dreams and the occasional clown with a wandering heart. And some will tell you that if you stand along the rails of Cumbres and Toltec on a quiet evening, some say that you can still hear her, a woman's voice crying out for her husband she never got back. She blames Cheyenne, though not for another woman, but for bucking horses that claimed him. Every Tuesday, he'd run out of Chama to gamble his life in rodeo rings of Wyoming, and every Tuesday night, she swore she could hear the whistle carrying him away forever, chasing the rest that finally won. Now, folks, lean in close, because this part of the story ain't in the guidebooks. Everyone loves the high line, the narrow stretch of track hugging the cliff like a tightrope, 1,000 feet of nothing but air on one side, pretty as a picture by day, but by night, that's when the shadows come out. Back when the first trains ran on the high line, the engineers swore they saw fires flickering up on the ridges, drums in the dark, and when the locomotives slowed from the curves, that's when they appeared. Warriors in the canyons, face painted like skulls and demanding a toll. Not a nickel, not a ticket. No, they wanted fear itself. Any passenger foolish enough to say, I already paid in Durango, well, let's just say the toll was collected another way. The story goes that they scalped hung from telegraph poles like grimsby steamers, and a few unlucky heads rolled right down into the Animas River, bouncing like pumpkins at harvest time. And here's the kicker. To this very day, brakemen whisper that if you don't sit quietly on the high line, you're going to feel a tug on your hair, like ghost hands testing if your scalp's worth taking. Some folks even claim they've even seen faces in the canyon walls, grinning, waiting, daring you to look out the window. The first passenger trains to rattle across the high line carried prospectors, gamblers, and school brave enough or foolish enough to sit by the window as the train crept along the cliff, the firebox throwing sparks into the dark, and the warrior stepped out onto the ledge ahead of the locomotive. He did move, didn't flinch, just raised a hand. The engineer blew the whistle, two long, one short, but the warrior stood his ground. Then, with a voice that carried above the steam and the whistles, he said, "Pay the toll or lose your soul." Now passengers thought it was a joke. A few even laughed, but the conductor refused. The train lurched, the headlamp flickered, and even a man on board felt a tug on his hair. One gambler swore he lost his scalp right there, and to this day you can hear him crying if you pass the curve after sundown. Today the legend still spreads very quickly. You didn't come across the High Line without payment. Coins wouldn't do, tickets meant nothing, the toll was fear, respect, and silence. Those who scoffed while brakemen claimed that their heads were found rolling down the screen slope, bouncing all the way to the Animas River, where they bobbed like lanterns. A woman from her seat from 18B once leaned out to prove the story false. She never came back in. All they found was her bonnet pinned to the telegraph pole by a spear. Modern crews laugh at the old tales until they run into night trains. More than one fireman is reported seeing shapes running along the rigid line, keeping pace with the locomotive. Some say they still demand a toll, and even if you ride with the windows open, you may feel a brush of fingers on your scalp, testing and tugging to decide whether you paid enough. They say that there was a time when passengers weren't supposed to be on the train at all. See, when the railroad came through Rockport, there were inspectors who would fine the crews for sneaking folks into boxcars. But money was tight and families were desperate to get north, so they sealed up one of the boxcars full of stowaways. The trick was simple. Open the door just long enough to breathe, and then slam it shut again before anyone along the line could spot him. Inside it was hotter than a boiler and darker than a mine shaft, and the only thing you could hear was the labored breathing of 50 people hoping not to die of smoke before Silverton. Now, here's the part that they didn't print in the guidebooks. Folks swore that when the door cracked open nearly at Rockport, they saw something standing by the trestle, something huge, 19 feet tall, and it was an inch silhouette against the moonlight. The old brakeman claimed it was the spirit of a young boy, a track worker crushed when the dynamite of the High Line ledges. They never found him alive, just his boots and his banjo. They said the ghosts grew taller every year and stretched up the canyon walls to themselves. But this wasn't just the wandering phantom. No, this was Giants that had a mission. He came back with the band. A funky 5-piece band, drums echoes like avalanches, fiddle squealing like a brake shoe, and a banjo clicking in time with the rails. Some say they even heard a trumpet through. Nobody ever figured out where the trumpet came from. So as the story goes on, when the boxcar finally rattled into Silverton, the crew knew that they had to check it. They heard whispers that stowaways had snuck onto the train back at Durango, so the railroadmen want to go catch them red-handed. Now remember, these passengers inside had been sweating, choking in the dark all the way through Rockport. Crack the door only long enough to breathe and seal it tight again. They were hot, tired, rattled half to death, and after seeing the 90-foot giant and his funky 5-piece band echoing through the canyon, when the brakes screeched and the train hissed to a stop, they braced themselves. Then the doors were opened and thrown to the open wide, and this is what happened. The crew yanked the sliding board door back with a roar of steel and sunlight blasting in it. The inspectors peeled inside and froze. Nothing. No stowaways, no crates, not even a footprint in the dust, just an empty car. The passengers' horror. But here's the kicker. This is the passengers' terror. But here's the kicker, folks. They were still in there. Every last one of them. They swore that they had been huddled together, blinking into the light, watching the inspectors stare right through them. One woman fainted. A miner clutched his beard and muttered, "We died back at Rockport, and this is hell's waiting room." Another man tried to shout, but his voice made no sound. To the railroad men outside, it looked like an empty car, but to the passengers, it was like they had been erased, vanished, or worse, turned into ghosts themselves. This is one thing that creeps out Silverton and anybody there, is that finally the inspector slammed the door shut, muttering how maybe they opened the wrong car door, or wrong car. The latch clanked, and in the instant poof, the passengers could feel each other again, breathing, panicking, alive. When the crew reopened the box the second time, everyone was visible again, sweating, coughing, terrifying but real. And here's the part that haunts Silverton today. Nobody ever figured out what happened in those few moments. Did those passengers slip into another world? Were they caught in the spell of a tall boy's ghost music, or were they just few minutes nothing but echoes, living phantoms inside of an invisible car? To this day, railroaders said the boxcar in that story was quite retired and left to rot outside the yard. Some say if you tap on the wood walls at midnight, you hear voices answering back, whispers of passengers who aren't sure if they ever made it out alive. And some swear if you ride the High Line close to your eyes near Rockport, you'll feel it in the shiver that you're not alone and that no one's there anymore, that they made you vanish too. So folks, 10 years after the sardine box vanished into the legend, 10 years after passengers swore they had died and returned after shadows danced along the High Line and the giant with his funky pie-piece band rattled the Rockport, folks, they thought maybe the railroad had pushed its curses behind it. But then the Denver Rio Grande wasn't done yet, because from Shaman, New Mexico rolled another story, not of ghosts and monsters, but something more dangerous. Yes, folks, we're talking about love. A little more dangerous than ghosts and monsters. Love, folks. It's a love thing. Folks, the story just goes on from here. It was a little past 3 in the afternoon, and there was a woman named Emma that stood waiting at the station in Chalmers, New Mexico. She wasn't pacing, she was just humoring, and no, she just was staring down at her pocket watch like it held the whole world inside. Tick, 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 every second closer till Silverton. As soon as that train arrived, she was ready to get on board. But fate had its own sense of ideas that day. See, the problem was the brakeman in the engine had stepped out for his coffee break. Only problem was he forgot to set the running brake. That iron horse, heavy as sin, twice as stubborn, started rolling on all on its own. By the time it reached the platform, it wasn't stopping. It was just gliding straight down the tracks, steady as 10 miles an hour, hissing steam and clattering like it had been in better places to be. Today, even a bicyclist or an inline skater can move faster than that. But oh no, Emma didn't flinch. She saw that train coming. She clutched her locket, hiked her skirt, and jumped all the way up under the train as if she was an Olympic sprinter. And the bad news is that some people acted the way that people do today sometimes. Now, some folks clapped politely, and others cheered, and others did not. There were 2 rows in the back, sat an old woman in a black lace hat and the size of a frying pan. She gave Emma a long stare, pursed her lips, and hissed, "Ugly brute, thinks she's a cowboy jumping trains like some fool stunt rider." The whole car went quiet. You could have heard a pin drop, but Emma just smiled, sat down, tipped her chin, and walked right past the old woman. She wasn't ugly, she wasn't a brute, she was just a girl chasing her story, and her story was just about to begin. So guys, back in 1889, Otis Myers had the big idea, right? He wanted to run a shiny new branch of the Silverton Northern Line up to the mining boom town of Gladstone. Problem was Otis didn't have the cash. Investors looked at him and looked at the mountains and said, "Okay, you build it, but you're going to pay for it." So the Gold King Mining Company steps in and says, "Fine, we'll build it ourselves." And boom, the Silverton Gladstone Northern Railroad is born. Sounds grand, right? Yeah. Until you folks find out that it was only about 7.5 miles long. 7 miles, folks, that's correct. I had grocery lists longer than that railroad. Now, folks, here's the funny part. People said they couldn't build more track because the mountains were too steep. Avalanche danger, switchbacks, blah, that's according to the rumor. But they weren't worried about the mountains. They were concerned about shooting up blasting caps and laying the actual track. Now, folks, back in the late 1880s, Silverton wasn't just a mining town. It was a place where gold, whiskey, and bad decisions all ran the same timetable. But at the heart of all one was a woman named Kate with blue eyes, McGraw. And folks, here's the funny thing about Kate's backstory. She was brunette with piercing blue eyes, the kind of woman who had charm like a preacher's daughter. The Scare from the Devil in the same sentence. She ran the saloon girls for half the country. Dancers, showgirls, companions, you name it. Legend has it that Kate basically owned the train back then. If the Durango and Silverton had a VIP car, Kate was in it. Velvet curtains, polished brass, and whiskey on tap. She had a strict rule. If you don't treat my girls politely, you can huff it back to Silverton. And here's the kicker. She actually made 2 men walk back once. Folks said it took them 3 days. When they arrived in Durango, they were shoeless, sunburnt, and swearing off whiskey forever. Just from reading from the tabloids and the things in the history papers, there's a miner, number 1, doesn't necessarily have a name. He said, I told her I didn't like her whiskey. Next thing I know, she's pointing at the door and saying, enjoy the hike, sweetheart. The other article that's interesting is about the miner, number 2. He was obviously hobbling. He said he saw God 3 times on the trail, almost bitten by 2 rattlesnakes. They said that she was sweet to the charisma and sweet to the charm, but she had quite the sass of an attitude and cussed like a sailor. Well, folks, just like Will Smith said, let's go ahead and get jiggy with it, because that's exactly where we're rolling into town with. This brunette and ice blue eyes and an attitude sharper than a miner's pickaxe. She owned the nicest sleeping car and the fanciest dresses. If you stepped out of line, she kicked you off the curb. You know, and the funny thing is that there were some things that she didn't necessarily talk about, and that's where it's going to get weird. Katie had a penguin. Not just any penguin, but a South Pole penguin, to be for sure. He had just as much sass as Kate did, or even worse. He always claimed that he was from the deep, deep South. If Kate had a problem in the bar, she'd send that penguin in and he'd handle the problem. Most people would fistfight that penguin, took its flippers, and went to town. 1 miner vanished, 2 tables got flipped, and a piano player just kept playing. The piano player played as if nothing happened. Hey guys and gals, don't end up like that guy. If you're riding Kate's ghost train, grab yourself a proper Durango t-shirt. Links in the description. Now folks, if you ever ride the Durango and Silverton train, it'd be a whole lot cheaper for you to buy a Durango and Silverton t-shirt from Amazon than buy it inside their store. Now folks, if you ever wander into Silverton and duck into Kate's bar, yeah, that's Kate. You might just hear stories about 2 pranksters who thought they were funnier than one-legged mule in line to dance with Billy and Joel. Folks, guess what time it is? It's that gag time. Billy walks in and whispers, buddy, I got bad news. Bo says, what, your dad died? Billy gasps and said, what? No, wait, did your dad die? Joel turns around and says, when's the funeral? Billy, confused, says, what funeral? Joel grins and says, exactly. Just grab yourself a Durango and Silverton t-shirt on Amazon instead. And yeah, as a little tiny Amazon associate fairy, I do earn from qualifying purchases, which means I can keep feeding Kate's penguin so he don't come after your boots. And if Kate ever asks where you got the t-shirt from, just tell her that the penguin sold it to you. So folks, back in Kate's time, even after her complicated death, her name still carried power. People didn't just remember her, they feared her. Some miners used to laugh it off. They'd say, she's dead, what can a spirit do now? But others, well, they found out the hard way. A few men spoke bad about Kate, mysteriously vanished. Others bragged that we were going to spit on her grave, only to find out later that they were strangled in their sleep. Others think that Kate hung them. Even today, some say if you hear a whisper her name or on the High Line, you can feel cold hands brushing down the back of your neck, like she's still deciding who rides the train and who takes the long way down. There's rumors that a miner was riding the train and got kicked off the train and got thrown off the High Line. Said he was sitting there smoking a cigarette up there on the High Line, and he was warned about smoking that cigarette. Others claimed that the miner got kicked off and he fell 400 feet to the Animas River. And about the abandoned Ouray to Silverton line, they said the railroad stopped because the train was too rough. Locals swear otherwise. They say Kate cursed the entire project when railroad men refused her special whiskey policy. To this day, the tunnels are silent, and when the fog rolls in, some folks swear that Kate's laughing echoes in the canyons. Speaking of legends, my next video has a special 3D photo that might just put your face to face with Kate herself. If you haven't grabbed your 3D glasses yet, now's the time. I dropped a link in the description where you can grab them on Amazon. Trust me, when Kate shows up, you're going to want to see every chilling detail. Alright, folks, I've been talking about the 3D glasses. Hush now, don't talk bad about Kate. Just do yourself a favor, take my link, head over to Amazon, and grab yourself a pair of 3D glasses, because you're going to need them for the next video. Psst, be quiet. Word of warning. My link carries a special discount, and if Kate Ghost finds out that you got a deal that she didn't approve, well, let's just say you might wake up in the middle of the night with something cold hovering over you, whispering, "Don't you dare cheat Kate." So somewhere in between the whispers through the trees, you'll hear a rumor that's going on. Some folks say that engine 485 fell off the turntable pit and was an accident, but me, I heard too many whispers. See, back in the Kate's day, that engine was pride of the line. Smooth, powerful, untouchable, but Kate didn't like anything she couldn't control. So, they say that night before, a few miners were at the bar talking trash about her, laughing, even calling the brunette bruiser a big mistake. Next morning, 485 rolls onto the turntable and then crunch. Down she goes right into the pit, never to run again. Coincidence? Maybe. But the old-timers swear they saw shadows on the steam that morning. Some say that she gave the turntable one good shove, almost as if she kicked it just to remind them don't cross Kate. As I finish this up, I'm just going to talk about perhaps there's rumors that Kate had a daughter, and her daughter's name was Gertrude. Correct? Yes, folks. Back even in her day, after her death, she had a daughter named Gertrude who was worse than her, and to be confronted by her daughter at that time was not the best way to go. Gertrude didn't give you any warning, she just pushed you off the train. Some say Kate's daughter Gertrude never left the rails. They whisper she hides beneath the racks of the train cars waiting, and if you stepped out of line, your boot drifted too close where she hangs, well, she's strong enough to yank you right off the train. One miner found out the hard way. They said that Gertrude bit into his leg, and he was about to board, and he was screaming, lost his footing, and hit the dirt hard. By the time others turned around, he was gone. So, folks, if there's one thing we learned today, folks, that Gertrude is still hungry and she's not picky. She'll be yelling at the top of her lungs in her ghostly language, "I'm waiting." And speaking of waiting, in the next video, we got something special lined up. So, I'll have a 3D photo at the end that you can see. Till next time, folks, keep your eyes on the tracks, and maybe, just maybe, you just might don't look under the train. Don't look under the tracks. You just might get eaten by Gertrude.